So right now I'd like to introduce our special guest for the evening. He's a name that is really familiar in leadership circles and even more familiar in the coffee world. He's been a speaker at our club a few times, but he is literally one of my heroes in life and in leadership specifically. So please welcome Mr. Howard Behar. Howard, it's great to have you here. And if you can unmute Howard so we can hear you, that would be great. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Howard, good to have you here. Thank you so much.
Great to be here, Mark.
I'm very jealous, Howard. How hot, you're down in California. How hot did it get today where you are?
It's 85 in Palm Springs today. It was very nice.
Yeah. Okay, this meeting is over. We're done. No, I'm just kidding. Howard, it's great to see you. So I want to start our conversation tonight, Howard. You spent a good part of your career, 50 years in the consumer-related businesses. Give us a snapshot of some of the roles that you've played over the years.
Well, you know, I grew up in Seattle in a mom and pop grocery store. My dad had a grocery store out between Thackeray and Latona on 45th by the Dick's Drive-In. So that's where I started as a young kid, and I worked in family businesses from in the furniture industry for a while, and left those and went into corporate life and worked for a company called Levitt's Furniture, which is no longer around. Used to be down in South Center, and I worked for a division of Federated Department Stores, and I worked for a company called Grand Tree Furniture Rental, which was headquartered in Portland, Oregon. I was a VP of merchandising there, and then I went on to a company called Thousand Trails, which was in outdoor recreation here in the Northwest. And from there, I accidentally stumbled into Starbucks. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. I was 43 years old, and had to create a new career for myself. And I met this young guy named Howard Schultz. And Howard was looking for a VP of operations in this tiny little company. And when I first talked to him, there was 15 stores. And when I finally joined, there were 28 stores. And so I turned right instead of turning left in life. You know, luck is where opportunity meets preparation. And I was prepared, but I had a lot of luck. And the opportunity came along.
Howard, what was it? What do you think? Why do you think Howard asked you to join Starbucks? And when you first joined, what did he say your marching orders would be?
Well, we had a year-long romance before he actually asked me to join. I was trying to buy a business before I joined. I tried to buy Market Spice Tea down in the market, but couldn't get the owner to let go of it. And so I was interested in the industry. And so Howard and I got together about a year after our first meeting, and I asked him, I said, Howard, can I work in the company for a week for free? You take a look at me, I'll take a look at you, and let's see what happens. And so after that week, I said to Howard, this is a good place for me. This is the right place. And, you know, Howard was 10 years younger than I was, and he really hadn't had any experience in much experience in multi-unit retailing, and I'd had a lot of experience in it. So that's what I was really coming in to do, was to lead the retail organization, and that's what I did. And I was the one that kind of drove the people-centric culture. It's when I first got there, all entrepreneurs they see their business as their product or service. And the truth of the matter is, once you hire one person, you're no longer in that product or service business. Now you're in the people business. And I had tried to get convince Howard that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but we're in the people business serving coffee. And that's what I eventually drove through the organization. And that's what he wanted from me.
Wow. You know, I think all of us have met people in our lives, Howard, that we are immediately impressed by. When you first met Howard Schultz, did you think, here's going to be really a national iconic figure and one of the top business leaders in the world at the time? Or was it like a lot of startups where you thought, maybe this will work out, maybe it won't?
Well, you know, Howard had a tremendous amount of energy, and you could tell right away that he had one of those traits that all entrepreneurs have to have, and that's persistence. You knew that right out of the gate. And I think what most attracted me to Howard was our common values. Before I went to work there, I'd made this list of things that I wanted in the next organization I was going to be part of. I thought it was going to be my own organization, you know, one that I either had started or bought. And when Howard and I compared our lists, they were the same thing. I wanted everybody to get to vote. right, in their area of expertise. And I coined the phrase, the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. And Howard believed that as well. I wanted everybody to have a piece of equity in the company. And Howard wanted that as well. And so we're comparing these notes, and it was like we were coming down the same pathway. We had a lot of differences. You know, Howard was much more of a street fighter than I was, you know, raised in outside of Brooklyn, you know, and I was more soft and gentle Seattle, you know, but we shared that those common virtues, common values, so to speak. And that's what I think really drew me to Howard.
Yeah. We've heard Howard speak in the past about how, you know, really being poor as a kid, and his father, I think, was a delivery driver and was injured on the job and was unable to support the family. And, you know, Howard has said that, you know, that life experience that he had as a kid of not really having any money and much security really drove what he did as a leader at Starbucks in terms of trying to create that safe place and create that great business. Let's talk a little bit more about servant leadership now, Howard. I know it's a buzz term now,
Yeah.
but in your career, when did you first realize that servant leadership was something that you wanted to embrace as you?
52 years ago. A man gave me this little booklet written by a man named Robert Greenleaf called The Leader as Servant. And it basically laid out the groundworks for what servant leadership was about. Robert Greenleaf coined the term servant leadership. So, you know, I had this kind of bent, you know, as a young person leading, you know, small organizations, of what I thought leadership was. I mean, I didn't even, you know, the word leadership wasn't in my lexicon at the time. I was just being Howard, doing Howard stuff. And, but you know, when I read that little pamphlet, I said, it put to words the things that I believed in. Now, I wasn't a conscious competent. I was, you know, I would say I was an unconscious competent. In other words, I knew about it and I had the right ideas, but I didn't really understand it and I really couldn't teach it. And so I went on that journey trying to be a conscious competent, a person that knows what matters to him and knows how to teach it. And I've been studying servant leadership for over 50 years. And, you know, I'd like to tell you that I've got it down. I still don't have it down, but I'm absolutely committed to it. And without a doubt, I know that it works. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get rich. What it means is that you live a life that's worth living and you lead your people in that way, in that dimension.
Wow. So you literally taught hundreds, if not thousands of people at Starbucks. And I've always been interested, Howard, when little companies grow and they scale, I've always been curious, how do they preserve that DNA? How do they preserve those values that you and Howard and Orrin Smith decided you wanted to have Starbucks embrace from the beginning? So as Starbucks scaled and as you're mentoring people, what did those conversations sound like that you had with the people that you were bringing along?
Well, you know, first of all, you got to understand that every organization has a culture. You know, we get to see lots of people that say, I'm going to go hire a consultant to help me develop my culture. No, you already have a culture. The question is it the culture you want? And so Howard and I and Orrin, we were really focused on the culture that we wanted. We weren't going to build this company on the backs of people. We were going to build this company with people. And that's why you saw healthcare benefits. We were one of the first companies that gave, you know, anybody in the, you know, I loosely call the quick service industry, healthcare benefits. Everybody got equity. There were no company cars, no company health club memberships for executives. There was none of that stuff. Basically, Howard had the same healthcare benefits as the barista had. And so we came from that bent. And, you know, the truth of the matter is you have to constantly reinforce the culture you want. You have to live it. You know, what you recognize and what you reward for develop your culture. What your values are form your culture. How you live those values form your culture. And then you have to stay with it. It's constantly reinforced. It's just like a family with kids. You always have to constantly reinforcing what matters in your family, don't you? When you have kids, you're always reminding. And we had to always remind ourselves and always had to remind the organization why we were here. And so, you know, I probably, you know, I don't know how many thousands of speeches or conversations I've had at Starbucks when I was there for 21 years. They were always about two things. Number one, about people. Number two, about coffee. And I don't care if I was doing a television interview, I always would talk first about the people and second about the coffee. And that's what we did. I was constantly reinforcing, and so everybody else in the company constantly reinforcing the message that we were in the people business and what that meant to us. And so it just doesn't stay on its own. You have to constantly be talking about it, reinforcing it, and it's always reinforced by the actions you take. Right? Whatever things you do as a leader, that will either support the culture you want or detract from it. There's no escape from that.
Howard, what do you think the biggest misconception is about servant leadership?
That it's a soft, gentle, fuzzy thing. It's not. These are as hard skills as any hard skills can get. And people think, well, yeah, nobody's held accountable. No, servant leadership is about performance. Robert Greenleaf made that very clear, that servant leadership was also about performance, but it's performance with people. It's not abuse of people in the journey towards performance. It's understanding that you're there to serve your people, to help them get what they want out of life and what they need, whether it's more knowledge, better education, more responsibility, what it is. And in so doing, they'll help you get what you want, what the organization needs. So when you focus on serving your people first versus the idea of being served by your people, it makes such a huge difference. And no, these are not soft skills. This is about performance, but done in the right way, not on the backs of people, but with people.
I'd like to ask Howard what other companies can learn from the Starbucks model, because I feel like there are still way too many companies in America that, especially ones that are publicly traded, that focus just on the bottom line, and they really ignore things like turnover, and they ignore things like employee morale. And, companies will do surveys with their employees and get the survey results, and then they say they're going to do something, and then nothing really changes. What do you think that, and I should say that on your website, you make the case that actually servant leadership is more profitable than other forms of leadership. But what do you think other companies should learn from this model?
Well, I think they should learn that people are attracted to being caught doing the right things right, more than they are attracted to being penalized for doing things wrong. Right? I mean, if you think about your children, I always bring it back to family, because that's what it's about. Servant leadership is a lifestyle as much as it is as a leadership model. It's how you choose to live your life. So organizations, I think the biggest issue is that organizations think that they're to maximize profits or returns for their show. I think it's the wrong word. I think we should be thinking about optimizing. And optimizing means you need to take in the whole and look at its pieces and say, where do I need to be putting resources? What do I need to be doing so that I'm balancing out all these different constituencies in an organization? And the understanding that nothing good or bad happens in a company without people. If you want great results, there's only one way to get them, with people, and so I think too many companies, they think it's just soft stuff, and they think that they have to penalize people when they do something wrong, or if somebody says something that they don't like, they chastise them. I mean, we've got companies in our own backyard that did that for a long period of time. Some of our big time companies, and but yet you look at them today and they've totally changed. One I think is really important is Microsoft. Look at the difference between Microsoft today and Microsoft 10 years ago. Right? Microsoft's a great company. They were producing great results. But you look at the leadership now. People are dying to get back into the Microsoft again. Why? Because they got a people-centric leader. Right? And that's what's happened. And so, look, there's no guarantee that you're going to be more profitable. I think that there's no inherent conflict between treating people well and making money. That's a false equation. You treat people well, and I just believe you'll do better, just by nature. So I think more companies need to get on with that. And what's happening, you're seeing it now. You're really seeing it where CEOs are being held accountable. Look at Uber. Uber is one of the great examples. Guy that founded that company was an absolute jerk, right? He was. And did he have a good idea? Yes, he did. But he was not a good person. I mean, he may have loved his family. I don't know. I'm not talking about that. But he wasn't a good person to his people. And finally, it blew up. And what happened? The board said, you can't be here anymore. Right? CEO got held accountable. All because of that, because of how he treated his people. You know, look, here, we've got great examples in our own backyard. Look at Costco. I mean, Jeff Brotman and Jim Senegal, you know, they were two of the great, well, Jeff was one of the great servant leaders, and Jim is one of the great servant leaders in our country. Look at how they treat their people. Look, here you got Walmart on one end, Sam's Club, and Costco on the other end. They basically are started about the same time, you know, a little bit difference in time. One has a whole different bent on how they serve their people and treat their people than the other. And look at the difference in results. There is probably one of the most glaring examples of servant leadership in action.
Wow. Good stuff, Howard. You know, during this pandemic, companies have really had to reinvent themselves. And I remember you telling me the story about how the frappuccino was invented. And it really speaks to having that open-mindedness as a company to allow innovation. Could you briefly tell that story again, Howard?
Sure. We had a young woman who was our first district manager in Southern California, just after we opened our first 10 stores in Southern California. And she invited me down to visit her stores, and she took me on a tour of some competitor stores. And in one of the competitor stores, she bought me a drink. And she said, we're getting about 30 people a day coming into our stores asking for a beverage like this. And, you know, I'm a retailer, so I said 30 people a day. That was pretty good. And I noticed on that, it was selling for about $3-4 a drink at that time, and it was full of ice, so high margins, you know, we love that. And so I said to her, well, this is a good idea. Let me take it back to Seattle. Her name is Dina Campion. And Dina, like I said, the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. Well, Dina's job was to grow sales and to help her people grow and treat her customers well. So I took the idea back to Seattle and I laid it out, and there was a kind of a complete rejection of it because the person that was head of marketing at that time said, we're in the coffee business. We're not going to do that product. So, and I argued for a while, and I said, okay, I'll call Dina. And I called Dina. I told her, you know, Dina, there's no support right now. Let's give it a few months. We'll come back after it. About 3 weeks later, Dina calls me again. I hope all of you have somebody on your team that's just like Dina. She's like one of those little tiny dogs with really sharp teeth. And when they get their idea around something, they just sink their teeth in your calf. And no matter what you do, you can't shake them off. So Dina was that kind of person. So she called me up 3 weeks later, said, Howard, can you come visit me again? I said, Dina, what do you want? She says, well, I want to show you something else about that drink. I said, Dina, you know what the answer is? Let it go for a while. She says, no, really, please come visit me again. I said, okay, I got to be down there to look at some real estate. I'll come visit. So I went to visit her at the 3rd Street Promenade store in Santa Monica, one of our bigger stores. And she asked me to go sit down in one of the chairs, and she brought 3 little sample cups up to me. And she put them out. She said, take a sip of these. I took a sip. I said, Dina, these taste remarkably like that drink that you bought me in that other store. Are you trying to get me fired? And she just looked at me and she said, Howard, please, please let us try this. And it was one of those times that all of us have in our leadership journeys or management careers that, you go against the grain of the organization because you really, truly believe in something and you're willing to take a chance. And so I said to her, okay, you can try it. And she and a barista and a store manager had made the drink up. You know, they'd got the equipment, they'd done all this stuff. And I said, you can try it, but do not tell a soul. Said, you call me every night so we can see how it's going, because if it's not selling well, it's gone, you know? And so she called me. The first week she sold 50 drinks a day per store out of the 10 stores. The second week, 70 drinks a day per store. I'm thinking to myself, Howard, you're a genius, you know? And so I brought the idea back up and I invited Dina and her team to come back up, and we called a meeting, and Howard came this time. And we're sitting around this little tiny conference room, sitting around this little chair, and they brought in the sample cups and laid them down in front of people. And the guy that was head of marketing looked at it, and he looked at me and he said, Behar, I told you we weren't going to do this. I'm in charge of product development. And I'm not an emotional guy, but I would, not too much anyway, right? And I had this piece of paper with all the numbers on it. If we did even close to what was doing then, this was going to lift our sales by 15%, lift our profits probably by about 20%. So I asked Howard, I said, Howard, give me 90 days. If you don't like it in 90 days, It'll get rid of it, no questions asked. Well, the rest is history. Dina and her broom. It turned into a $4 billion business, global business. And all because of this one woman, Dina Campion, who just retired after 28 years. And she was the one that created it. I hardly did anything. I kind of knocked down the hurdles and gave her a chance. Well, that's an unusual example. I mean, not very often you're going to get a $4 billion business, but most things that happen are smaller. But the problem is that we ignore our people. We get busy. They come in our office and say, hey, boss, or hey, Jeff, or hey, Kevin, I got this great idea. I want to talk to you about it. They say, and you kind of roll your eyes and say, can't you see I'm busy? I'm working on something really important. I'm trying to decide where the bathroom should go in the building, and that's what happens a lot of the time. And we need to learn to listen to our people. I'm not pleading for anarchy here, but if we listen, right, you'd be surprised what your people can do.
Well, Howard, I know a lot of people have questions. Before we jump into the Q&A, I wanted to ask you, I mean, when I talked to Howard Schultz earlier this year in the early part of the pandemic, he said that Starbucks would be paying its employees in full during the pandemic, even when the stores were shut down. I guess that doesn't surprise you, does it?
No, absolutely not. That's exactly what we should have done. We gave them all healthcare benefits too.
Yeah.
And the ones that we had to lay off because stores had closed, we helped them find jobs. And I mean, I'm not involved so much, but I get the drum beats all the time because I know a lot of people and I still do a lot of speeches there. I have not heard one single beep or peep of complaint about Starbucks and from the people. And, it cost a lot of money. Unfortunately, Starbucks had a lot of money. They had a lot of money in the bank and that helped, but they used it. They used it the way they didn't use it to just reward their shareholders. They used it to help their people, and their people wanted to be there. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into some questions. Dorothy asks, Howard, would you be willing to analyze the Trump administration through the prism of servant leadership principles?
Are you kidding me? For all you Republicans, I'm sorry, but there aren't too many in Seattle, I know, but he's the antithesis of servant leadership. He's absolutely, you couldn't get further away from servant leadership than he is. If you tried, servant leaders take the bullet for their people. They don't blame others, ever. They take responsibility even when it isn't their fault. They step in, say, I own that, right? I mean, it's the worst example of leadership that I've ever read about. I am embarrassed for the country. I'm embarrassed for people that teach leadership, because I don't know how we're going to deal with this one. I mean, he'll be gone, long gone, whatever it is. But we have a problem because there's a lot of people now that think that's the way to lead. It's not. And I feel sorry for people that work in those kind of organizations where that kind of abuse goes on, and there are way too many of them. And his was one of them. Look at the guy he just fired from Microsoft. I mean, incredible. You couldn't, I mean, you couldn't hire a better person to sweep the floor than that guy, right? In the job that he was doing. And he fires him. I mean, it's, why? Because he didn't like what he said. Good leaders aren't threatened. Great leaders are not threatened by what their people say, no matter what they say, no matter what conflict they bring up. That was Howard Schultz. I was not a street fighter, but I was ferocious about the things that I believed in. Howard and I got blowout arguments. I mean, Orrin was always stepping in the middle of us saying, hey, boys, calm down. And Howard put up with it because he wasn't threatened by me. And that's what it takes.
Here's a question from Jeff. We lost a great citizen recently with the passing of Bill Gates Sr. I'd love the story that surfaced as to how he defended the business interests of a young Howard Schultz when he was buying Starbucks. Did you interact with Bill Sr., and do you have any thoughts to share?
Yeah, I served on the foundation, the University of Washington Foundation board with Bill Sr. And he was everything that everybody says about him, the kindest, most gentle guy. I mean, at the time that I got to him, he was starting to have, where he would fall asleep a little once in a while, and then he'd wake up and he'd be right back in the meeting again. He was a wonderful human being. And I was really a privilege to be on that board with him, and I enjoyed it all the time. And I got chances to interact with him because I had this idea about education, and he listened to me, and what did I know, compared to his son, but I thought I knew something anyway. And he honored me. And my wife also dealt with him because she was getting her PhD in social work at the University of Washington, and he was in the advisory board of the School of Social Work. So she got to spend time with him as well. And we both have the same opinion.
Yeah, what a gentleman.
Yeah.
Jevin has a question for you, Howard. Was there a bump in your road that almost pushed you off the servant leadership path, and what brought you back?
Well, I was young, I guess. I could have gone either way. I never got off that path once I got on it. I mean, there were times when I reported to somebody, and when I worked at Better Aid department stores, the guy that I reported to was not a really good, nice human being. He was a good human being, but not a very nice human being. And I pushed back against that, and of course I got fired, which is probably what should have happened to me because I was mouthy about him. And but no, I've stayed with it. Mark, it drives my life. It's why I'm here. My mission in life is to nurture and inspire the human spirit every day, beginning with myself first and then for others. And I'll show you, I have the document here. This is Howard in 50 words or less. This has my mission statement, my core values, and how I do everything. I've had this paper for 45 years. I've changed things on it, but this drives my life. I look at it every day to remind myself why I'm here.
Wow.
And that's what I did at Starbucks. I was the same way, and that's what drives me. It's why I feel good about myself, and that's why I do it. It makes me feel better about myself.
Would you mind sharing that, Howard, with us, or is it too personal?
No, it's not personal. No.
Well, how about I'll reach out via email, and I'd love to share that with our club.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. Let's see, what else do we have? Questions. Jan asks, Howard, in a hierarchical culture, how can someone foster a servant-led environment? That's a good question, because a lot of companies have this sort of set, rigid structure, right? And you might be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, you can have hierarchy. You can have different levels. Different companies operate at different levels. Let's take an example of the military. They're hierarchical, but they're really probably at the foremost and forefront of servant leadership. People don't realize that. Most of the military organizations are led that way, but they still have a hierarchy. But, if you're in an organization that is that way and doesn't have a bent towards servant leadership, but you have responsibility for a department or an area, you can do it in your own little organization. And when you start doing it right, it like attracts like. People will notice what's going on, and they want to be part of that. And so I've seen people start from the bottom of the organization with the idea of servant leadership and help it grow with inside and the middle and from the top. It can start anywhere. It just takes a person and then a group of people that want to make it happen. And you have to, as that word persistence, you have to persevere. You got to stay with it. And because you can't give up, but you can do it anywhere in any kind of organization. I mean, if you got a totally autocratic leader like you had in our president, that isn't going to happen, right? And then you have to make the right decision. You make a value. You see where you work represents your values. If you're working in an organization that isn't honest, isn't caring, then that reflects on you. And so if your values are in conflict with those things, then you're working in the wrong place. And so, I always tell when I talk to college kids, I said, you can choose where you want to work, but you better figure out who you are first. Figure out who you are as a human being. And then when you go looking for a job and looking for where you want to work, evaluate who you are and what matters to you against what they say they are. There's always a gap, right? And you have to figure out what gaps can I live with. But it makes a difference.
One more question. What do you miss most from your time at Starbucks?
Oh, without a doubt, the people. It's I miss that energy, and it's I miss watching people grow and taking on more responsibility. And I miss the people that left our organization, went on to do great things. There's nothing more fun than seeing one of your people leave you, go someplace else and do something even bigger than they did with you. And, there's no more greater reward than that. So, I miss the people. My job primarily was to grow the people. That was it. I always believed in this little equation. Grow the people grow the organization, and the organization grows the business. And it's pretty well that simple.
Vicky asks, how do you think about vulnerability as it relates to effective leadership and building trust?
It's a core piece of leadership. Just authenticity is, particularly in these days. This time right now is a time when you want to be the real human. All of us are afraid right now. There's nobody that's not afraid. We're afraid for our health. We're afraid for our businesses. We're afraid for our families. We're afraid for our communities, maybe at different levels, but it's okay to express that. Your people need to see that you're human, and they need to know it's okay to be human back. And yeah, absolutely. Vulnerability. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's the opposite of what everybody thinks. When you can show your weaknesses and talk about them, people respect that, and they salute you for it, and they will help you make up for your weaknesses.
Howard, I think that there's, in my experience, in broadcasting, I feel like managers will not always tell you the full story. And I know that's probably true in most businesses, because I think there's some information that companies just don't want publicly talked about, right? When it comes to certain situations. How do you decide as a leader in a company what to share with employees? How transparent can you be? And when you don't feel like you can share some sensitive stuff, how do you handle that?
Well, the things that you don't share are your interactions with other people in the organization, right? If you've had a review or something that I don't care, even if it was positive or negative, you just don't share those things. If you have lawsuits and stuff like that, probably it's not something you're going to disseminate. But everything else is fair game. What wouldn't you share with your people? How much profit you make because you're worried that they'll think that you're getting rich and they're not? No, it's not. They respect that. People respect. Yeah, are there some people that don't like that? Yeah, we'll hold that against you, sure. But they're the ones that aren't going to stay with you anyway. So, but I believe in sharing everything. We used to have open forums at Starbucks. And an open forum was a place where we would present what was going on in the company, how we did the last quarter, what was happening, new things were coming, a new product, whatever it happened to be. And then we'd open up to the floor, just like we're doing right now. And we honored this commitment. You could ask any question or make any comment without any fear of retribution at all, period, or any judgment. And we held true to that. And that really made a difference because it opens up the organization. See, because only the truth sounds like the truth anyway. If you lie to your people, they know it. You think they don't know it? Of course they know it. They know a hell of a lot more than you think they know. They get all the feedback, because they're going out and having a drink and having coffee, whatever it is. You can't hide things. I believe in putting it all on the table, telling the truth, telling it like it is, being vulnerable. If you got a problem, who can help you more to get out of that problem than your people? You got to trust them. Don't circle the wagons. That was always, and Starbucks made a mistake, during the last downturn, 2007, 2008. The leadership circled the wagons. They got fearful and they said, oh, look what's happening to the stock price. Oh, all this stuff. And so they pulled everything in, and it totally destroyed trust in the organization. And it took them years to get it back. I mean, it's you got to trust your people with the information. They can help you.
Can Starbucks get too big? And as it continues its global expansion, because, large organizations inherently create bureaucracies, how do you prevent, being too bureaucratic and too big and clunky?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think the question is more, will Starbucks get too slick? I always thought that Starbucks was about texture, right? And the texture was the interactions that we had with each of you that were human in nature. They weren't rote. They weren't, hey, would you like a large order of fries with that today? It wasn't that. It was trying to be more real and caring, and it was the same way with our people. I had a question once. We had this program that Dave Olson, who created, about leadership, and in one of the meetings, one of the officers stood up and asked me, he said, Howard, how can we possibly expect all the people to care? And my answer back was, how can we not expect all the people to care? I don't care whether it's 1 million people, whether it's 10 people, or whether it's 2 million. Shouldn't make any difference. We all have to care, and we all have to drive that. And You know, I can't, I don't know, too big. I don't think big is an excuse. I think,
That,
you know, when you start to say, well, we'll get too big, it's no, what is it you want? What's the culture you want? No matter what size you get, it takes different skill sets and different ways to reinforce it. When we went from 28 stores when I started to when I retired, there were 15,000. I couldn't touch every person. And to the first 400 stores, I knew every store manager by name. I knew all their results. I knew their wives' names, sometimes even their kids' names. You know, after we got to 500 stores, you know, I was sending out birthday and anniversary cards to everybody for the first 300 stores. You know, I couldn't do it anymore. So we had to put it out. So other people were doing it. But no, I don't think big is an excuse. I would never take that as an excuse. Tell me what you want, and I don't care what your size is, you can make it happen. And amazingly enough, we've done it across, I don't know how many countries they're in, it's 90 some countries now.
wow, that's amazing.
It is, it's me.
Yeah. Speaking of stumbles, Starbucks had a problem with systemic racism, how they dealt with some perceived racism within the organization. Do you think the company has learned from what happened in that incident, and how are they doing today?
Yeah, I think that the two incidences were, one was in Philadelphia and the other one was it Minneapolis or in Wisconsin? I can't remember, but one of those two places. And the first one was where two young black men came into the store and wanted to use the restroom. And at that time, you know, they were having lots of struggles with restrooms being used by homeless, not staying clean, and people with drug usage and stuff, all the excuses you can give, you know. And so they said, no, I'm sorry, I have to buy a cup of coffee before I can use the restroom. Well, they were waiting for somebody. They were going to have a meeting with somebody, a real estate person. And so they went and sat down in the chairs and were waiting for this person. And the store manager came up and asked them to either buy something or to leave, totally against what we've always done. We never had those kind of rules, but somehow it got into this group of stores. It happened to be one store where it popped up, but it was in a kind of a group of stores. And probably because of a district manager, a regional manager trying to maximize, right? Trying to maximize sales instead of optimize, you know? And so she called the police. I mean, totally the wrong thing to do. Why would we ever do that? That was not part of Starbucks culture. And so that happened. And of course, you know what happened? It blew up. And I mean, probably I've seen Howard cry a few times. That was one time he cried. And he immediately got on an airplane. Kevin Johnson got on an airplane. They went right back there with the team, and they started to have conversations in the community. They owned up to it. They didn't make any excuses. They were vulnerable. They didn't worry about lawsuits. They did what they needed to do, and didn't make any excuses. And then they closed the stores for an education development program around systemic racism. You know, but that's never enough. You know, educate programs like that, they might get you going, but you have to hold to it. And they're full force in it. We were pretty full force in it. We were early on into diversity programs at Starbucks, but that was probably out of all the things that have embarrassed me or made me feel bad about Starbucks, that was one. And once not quite like that happened in Wisconsin, where one young black man lost his life because the police got called. He was happened to be outside the store, wasn't doing anything, and the police overreacted to something. But it was terrible. And, you know, those things can pop up in any organization. When they asked the young woman who was the store manager, would you have done that if the two people were white? And she said, no, I wouldn't have.
Yeah. I want to leave it on a positive note, Howard, and that is, I'm going to, let's pretend that we are in a company here. You're our president. And I want you to inspire us as we head out into the rest of our week. So give us some inspiration.
Inspiration. Well, my first chapter in the book, It's Not About the Coffee, talks about wearing one hat. And that's the hat that, not the different roles that we play, but the hat that we wear, that Charlie's wearing right now. I can see Charlie. And thank you, Charlie. And it's the hat that we wear that defines who we are as human beings. Well, you have to do some work to figure out what that hat is. And there's no time there. You're never too old or too young to do this work, to go into your life. And the first thing you need to do is write down 8 to 10 core values that you believe that you want to live by the rest of your life, however long you have to live. These are things that totally matter to you. There's other core values. There might be 50 things that relate to, or maybe even 100, but there's 8 to 10 core ones that are just absolutely drive your life and are really important to you. My first core value is honesty, right? And that really one of the core things that drives my life. And so I wrote these 8 to 10 things down on a piece of paper. Then the second thing I did was write a mission statement. Why am I here? You know, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. Doesn't make any difference whether you're 80 or you're 12, you can do this work. And then how you want to do everything in your life, you know, a paragraph or two about how you want to live your life. And if you don't write it down, then you're just not making a commitment. You know, if you just are thinking about it and saying, well, maybe, no, you're not making it. Make a commitment to how you want to live the rest of your life. Write it down. And when you get up in the morning, that's your hat. That's who you are. That's how you live in all parts of your life, whether it's home, whether it's in your family, whether it's at work, whether it's with your, whatever it happens to be, in your spiritual life. You know, Howard is Howard no matter where he goes. Right? And that's what we want to get to. But if I hadn't done this work beforehand, I really didn't know who Howard was. And that was the first exercise I did when I first got into servant leadership. So that's what I would do.
Wow. Well, Howard, it's always inspirational to spend time with you. Really appreciate your work and the person you are and the work that you continue to do. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. Good luck.
Okay. Howard, keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Howard. Really appreciate you supporting our club this evening.
My pleasure.